Teaching somebody to learn something new can be incredibly frustrating for both the person who's learning and for the person who's teaching. It doesn't matter if you're a parent, a professional educator, or a hobbyist. But here's the good news. But here's the good news. A few small changes in an approach can make a huge difference and reduce the frustration from all sides and improve the success rates. Hi, my name's David, and on this channel, we explore all things around accessibility, visibility, and visible and hidden disabilities, and how we can make the world a more accessible place to live. Today, I'm sharing a practical tip on how to enhance the ability for somebody to learn, reduce the frustration, and improve the success rate. To give you an idea of my background, I'm a former special needs teacher, and I've used this technique time and time again to teach children and adults on how to learn. So, what's the technique? It's backward chaining. Normally, people learn or are taught to learn from the beginning to the end. You essentially go through the task from beginning. Normally, when people are taught, they're taught at the beginning of a task, and then they work towards the end of a task or a skill. So let's say, for instance, you're writing an essay or a letter. In essence, people start at the beginning of the letter. Dear sir, dear madam, when you're writing the letter, or sorry, when you're writing an essay, you'd start at the beginning. Yes, you might have a plan, but actually you start at the beginning. When you're learning how, for instance, to put a nail in the wall, you'll start at holding the nail and holding the hammer. When you're learning to bake the cake, what you're doing is you're learning to essentially collect all the ingredients, and you'll go from the beginning to the end. There's a problem with this, and that's frustration, because during any points, there can be a feeling of frustration that the person is not managing to succeed or finish the task, finish the essay, finish the letter, finish putting a nail in a wall, finish baking a cake. The success just isn't there. The reward of completing something is simply not there. It could be the person might have a challenge with their spelling, with their understanding, with their fine motor skills, with their gross motor skills. And what's happening over a period of time, the frustrations are mounting because the person isn't being successful. They get frustrated, and it can take far longer to learn a task. So, backward chaining, what's the technique? Well, you start at the last point of that particular task, just before the task is accomplished. It's the success point, it's the completion point. So it could be, if you're writing a letter, it's the last sentence in the letter. If it's an essay, it's the last paragraph or sentence again in the essay. If it's putting a nail in the wall, it's hitting the nail but it's making sure it's the last hit to make sure that nail is secure. Not the first fiddly bits, but it's that last hit. If it's baking a cake, it's putting in the ingredients into the pan and then into the oven. It's the last it's the last step. And then what happens is you start building up success. So they've written the last line. They feel successful. It could be a short essay, a short letter. And then the confidence is there. I can do this. I finish this. And then you take the step before. If it's again a nail in the wall, it's a couple of hits before it actually goes in, but the nail is securely there. If it's the cake, it's the step before actually putting it in. So it could be taking the mixing bowl off. It's the step before. And again, you're working backwards. I'm going to give you a very clear example that I've used that's been highly successful, that, to be honest about it, from a practical perspective, can be incredibly frustrating. Many years ago, I was working in a school with children on the autistic spectrum. One child's task was to tie his shoelaces, and he had been set that task for 3 years. Week in, week out, he was learning to tie his shoelaces. The method he was taught, the method he was taught was, you put your shoe on, you get your shoelaces, you then cross over you tighten up the laces so they're firm on your foot. Then you get the two laces, you fold them over, and you take it step by step. There's a problem though. There were pain points, there were frustration points in that time. And that child was not going beyond the pulling of the turning round of the lace, because they hadn't developed the fine motor skills to do that. Also, the shoes weren't on securely. So the child was incredibly frustrated. The parents were incredibly frustrated. So backward chaining. What happens? What happens is that the shoe was securely put on. In other words, nice and secure, but not hurting the person. Then I folded over the laces and I took it to the point just before the pulling of the bunny ears. You know, when you've got the laces, when you literally, when you tighten up the laces and you just pull. And that means that you've made that knot. That was the skill that was being taught at the time. It was for the child to get the bunny ears and pull. They were tight on the shoe. The child was learning how to tie his shoelaces, because it was that skill to tie the bunny ears. We did that a couple of times, literally 4 or 5 times. And the child understood how to tie the bunny ears. And he was developing those motor skills. He understood the movement, everything around it. There was success. And he could go home and say, I've tied my shoelaces, because actually he had tied the shoelace. Then there's the step before that, which is you've got one bunny ear, one lace that's got that shape of a bunny ear, and you pull it, you create another bunny ear. So that in itself is another movement. That's, you're pulling and you're making the bunny ear. So he practiced that. It's pulling because it requires fine motor skills. Pulling and then pulling harder. The shoelace had been tightened. He practiced that. He developed those skills, and then he felt successful because he'd been rewarded. He'd tied his shoelace. And then it was the step before that. So it's wrapping around the lace. You've still got the bunny ear, wrapping the lace around and threading it through itself and pulling the bunny ear. So it's the step before. He did that. He's now tied his shoelace. Success has been made. He can see he's making progression. You could argue that actually it's reverse progression, but it's not, because all the time the end goal is to tie the shoelace, to independently put on the shoes, and that's a big task. All the time you're breaking down those steps bit by bit by bit, but in reverse order. And that accomplishes success. It's the same as, for example, if you're looking to develop somebody putting on putting on a jumper that's got buttons. There's a lot of skill involved. In other words, you've got to understand where the cardigan is, or the jacket is. Then it's understanding where the arm goes in order to coordinate it, which arm is left, which arm is right, where do you put it on? Then it's understanding that whole movement of putting the jacket on. Is it the right way up? Then you've got the skill basis of doing the buttons. Now, here's the thing with buttons, and I don't mean to be digressing, but actually buttons, if you're doing up buttons, buttons are small and big. The holes for the buttons are small. They can be small or big depending upon the size of the buttons. And actually, that can be very frustrating. So if somebody's struggling with, let's say, zips or buttons or a fine motor skill, get something that's bigger, that's easier for them to grip, get them to work on a bigger task, and then work backwards for them to work on smaller and smaller bits. So if it's you want them to do up buttons on a jumper, what you do is small buttons. You'll get them to practice with a jacket that's actually got big buttons. So they practice that movement of putting the button through. They understand that movement. You're reinforcing the movement. They feel successful. And then you go to slightly smaller buttons and smaller buttons and smaller buttons. It's the same again with zips. The standard way of teaching somebody is starting at the beginning and working towards the end. Backward chaining is the exact opposite. You're starting at the end point and you're working backwards towards the beginning. What that enables people to do is feel successful. I think it might be releasing endorphins. It's certainly reinforcing fine motor skills, gross motor skills, and you're getting that success after success after success. You're reducing the frustration. So I come back to the original point. Teaching people can be frustrating both for themselves and for the person that's teaching them. The small change is the approach to teaching. From the end to the beginning, you reduce those pain points, you reduce the frustration, and that can dramatically improve and speed up the process for somebody to learn something. Thank you very much for your time. It'd be lovely for you to comment on this, share success stories. If you can think of other teaching techniques, that would be amazing. Take care. Have a lovely day.